I,
Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with a gentleman that all Alderney residents would have met when he was station manager at Southampton. In addition, he's a really good friend of mine, so it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Maurice Wyatt, and we're going to take a look at original Aurigny, the planes and the pilots. Good to see you.
yeah, good morning, Tony. Thank you for asking me back again.
Well, I mean, you're part of the hit parade as far as Tony at 12 is concerned, so we have to do these things, don't we?
Fair enough.
You were there right from the start. So, Aurigny was founded in 1968 following the failure of a previous operator that served Alderney. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, indeed. Yeah, I mean, in '68, it was British United Island Airways, I think, that were doing the flights from Gatwick,
Hmm.
and they chucked in the route basically. So at that point, they were flying from Guernsey to Alderney route, and they dropped that in '68, and that's when Sir Derek Bailey took it over with Aurigny, which had just started up, and then BUA again dropped the Gatwick Alderney, and that's when we started up in 1970 at Southampton.
Up until then, the Aurigny operation was inter-island, Jersey, Alderney, and Guernsey. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, he started initially. It was the Guernsey Alderney, then Alderney, Guernsey Jersey, and then onto the mainland in 1970. Yeah.
So Southampton was an obvious candidate, in terms of the fact that it's probably the closest airport to Alderney, isn't it?
Well, it is really. Yeah. I mean, Gatwick, when we had the Islanders, which is what we started with, Gatwick really wasn't a starter. It was too far. Southampton, ideal. Yeah, close to Alderney itself, and also very good connections. So it was the ideal and sensible choice to go for.
And of course, you were appointed as station manager, but you'd had quite a bit of experience beforehand at Southampton Airport, hadn't you?
Well, I don't know about quite a lot of experience. I was a air traffic control assistant for about 6 months or so.
Well, that's enough
I
for me.
started, but yeah, so I'd sort of always wanted to work in aviation. So I got a job at the airport there, and yeah, so that was how I got into it. And then obviously in 1971, Mick McCormick offered me the job to come and work for Aurigny. So I took the chance, and it all worked out very well. And by May, I was full time, and by August, I was in charge.
And you had a few others with you, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah, we were
Mm.
just a very young crew, really. I mean,
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
only about 20. Steve Bailey, who joined with me just afterwards, was a couple of years younger than me.
yeah,
So we were really youngsters. We had to learn the ropes as we went along.
yeah, yeah. Well, let's see, we sort of entitled the talk planes and pilots. So should we do the
Yeah.
planes first and then get on to the pilots later? So
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
the first one was an Islander, eight-seater, is that right?
Yeah, yeah. Britain Norman were building the Islander. They were already started developing that in the middle '60s. And Sir Derek Bailey, when he was starting up Aurigny, worked very closely with Britain Norman. And basically, when he started in 1968, got the first Islander, which was always Golf Alpha Victor Charlie November. It's still somewhere in a museum
Mm,
somewhere.
yeah.
But that was the first one, and then he built up his fleet of Islanders. By the time I started in 1970 and we started the Southampton route, I think he had about five. There were about 5 or 6 Islanders, and that's what we had. And they used to plough around the islands and up to Southampton, but only 8 seats, as you say,
Yeah.
so quite small. And it was interesting, really. I was only thinking the other day that when he first started the airline, the thought was that it would be like a bus service. There would only be the pilot on the aircraft.
Yeah.
It would arrive at the airport, and the people would pay for a ticket to the pilot and put their own baggage on and get on the aircraft. And you can imagine how that might work.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was never going to work. I mean, you know, when you thought about it, I mean, can you imagine people turning up at Southampton then, and you know the amount of baggage that the Aurigny passengers used to carry,
Yeah.
and you can imagine the scrum around the aircraft of who was going to get their bags on and everything else. It was, yeah, he thought there didn't have to be any ground staff at first, but obviously that was never going to work.
Well, I suppose he was optimistic from the point of view of trying to get a thing to underway at a minimal cost, perhaps.
It was quite a good sort of thought,
Yeah,
really.
yeah,
I suppose if you think about it, back in the 60s, I mean, getting onto an aircraft and getting onto an airport and through an airport was very simple, really. I mean,
yeah.
there was no security like there is now. And, you know, anybody could access the apron quite easily. So, yeah, you could have the aircraft turn up and whatnot. But you know, where does it go when people turn up and the weather's out and the aircraft doesn't turn up and you've got no information? So yeah, quite a good idea, but yeah, maybe not.
But you needed somebody to control gate 2, and that was you.
Yeah, yeah, that was us. Yeah,
Yeah, looking
unbolt.
back on the old
Yeah,
terminal. So the
yeah. But
first
as
try.
I say, so
Sorry,
as I say, anybody could just walk down the side and get onto the apron and get onto an aircraft. That was
incredible, isn't it?
simple.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What a shame things have
Um,
changed so much. But there we are.
yeah.
But first pilot in was Bert Lane. Now we're going to
Yes,
talk
it
about
was.
him a little bit later, but we should. Was there a special ceremony? Did the fire engine squirt water over the plane or anything?
I don't know. I was obviously I was an air traffic assistant at that point, so
Yeah,
I can't actually remember Aurigny's first flight into Southampton. I know it was on the front page of the Echo, but basically, no, they didn't go squirting fire. Well, the fire engines at Southampton Airport were not that reliable actually at that point.
incapable of a squirt.
Yeah,
Oh dear.
we won't go into that one,
No,
but yeah.
we'll stay off that. I
Yeah,
mean, we are talking a few years ago.
yeah, I mean, their fire engine was an old Bedford fire truck from the Second World War. You know, they had a couple of those. It
A
was,
green goddess.
that was before that,
All right.
I think.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a really old Bedford thing. Yeah, probably though, as you say, probably the same sort of era. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. But there we are. So Derek, sort of with his connection with Britain Norman, is very keen to sort of get a larger aircraft, and that's when the Trilander comes in. Yeah.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, they started developing that, I suppose, probably not long after the launch of Aurigny, basically. They were, you know, looking to make the Islander bigger, and Sir Derek, I think, worked quite hard with them and of what he wanted, and said, obviously, if you can develop this aircraft, a bigger version, I'll buy it, you know, and
Mm,
we'll use it.
mm.
And yeah, so they developed the Trilander, and that started. First one came into Southampton in the September, I think, of 71, the year I joined.
So I mean, the development happened pretty quickly, and of course it doubled up on the capacity almost, didn't it?
Well, that's right. Yeah. I mean, they always said, yes, it could carry 17 passengers. I mean, that's with one sat up front with the pilot.
Mm.
Um, but in reality, yes. I mean, when we first got it, we could only operate it with, I think it was 10 passengers to start with while it was being proved.
Yeah.
Then it went up to 12 passengers that we could carry. And you know, and they kept increasing the all up maximum payload of the aircraft. And once you got past 12 passengers, then of course you can use average weights for passengers, and it makes it a lot easier. You haven't got to weigh everybody all the time, because that was always a bone of contention. People having to stand on the scales, you know. Some like to see the truth, and some didn't.
And of course,
But
presumably, when you did have to weigh them, that sort of then morphed into where you sat them on the plane.
Indeed, yeah,
Yeah,
because the first Trilanders didn't have a nose hold. They were what we call the short nose Trilander. The
yeah,
original Trilander
yeah.
only had a rear baggage hold. Um, Caused quite a lot of problems one way and another because if you think about it, the aircraft's inherently tail heavy to start with, and then all your baggage is in the back. So how do you trim it to get to get it
Quite.
level?
So
And of course,
large people at the front.
well, that was right.
Mm,
You had to have all the adults to the front, and all the if there were children, anything, they were right up the back. Which was a shame from the children's point of view because they always wanted to be near the front and
yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
And of course, the other way you could trim it was actually to sit somebody up front with the pilot, which we did a lot then. There was no problem doing that. You just had to pick out somebody who would be suitable to sit up front and, not cause a problem.
I think Mark did it on one occasion, and he always said to me, he said the guy was listening to Radio 2 most of the time during the flight. There
But
we are.
I think sometimes, people sort of think, well, what does the pilot do all the time? And they are looking around. They're not always twiddling knobs and talking to air traffic or anything like that.
Got to do something, I guess, from that point of view. So let's go into the 1980s. And there was a period when they decided to run uh, DHC Twin Otters, which I thought was a
Yeah.
very good aircraft, actually.
Yeah, I did as well. I mean, when we had the Twin Otters, they were good aircraft. They were actually we used to book them to 19. It could take 20, but we'll get into that why we only booked to 19. But yeah, they had plenty of space, plenty of hold space. It was quite a good passenger aircraft. It felt quite roomy. And it was ideal operation for a really short runway like Alderney,
Yeah,
and could also use the grass runway
yeah.
as long as it wasn't waterlogged. But it was an aircraft that was quite capable of using a grass runway, and that was quite useful, obviously, when you think how many times Alderney has crosswind
Mm,
problems and
mm,
like
mm.
that.
Um,
But
I mean,
it was,
it had provision for two pilots.
yeah,
Um,
we were still in the single pilot regime at that point,
mm,
and we were allowed to operate it as a single crew, as long as we didn't book it to 20 passengers. Once you had 20 booked, you had to have two crew.
all right, okay.
So at 19, you could still operate it as a single crew aircraft. Um, Having flown on it single crew and sat up front, it's quite a lot for a single crew pilot to do because you've got controls above you as well as
Yes,
in
that's
front.
right. Yeah, 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 yeah.
But yeah, it worked and it was fine. Yeah, and it was a really good aircraft.
Why did you think
Um,
they dropped them?
I think a lot of the problem was that at that point, if you're going back to the beginning of the 80s, we were doing so much inter-island flying as well, which is really short hops,
Yeah,
stop, start, stop, start. And with those particular engines on the Otter at that point, the number of start cycles that you performed actually diminished the number of hours between checks and everything else.
yeah,
So unlike the Trilander, which is like getting into your car and just switching the ignition on and off you go, it was a bit more of a problem with the Twin Otter. And I suppose really the only route it made really good sense on was going Guernsey, Alderney, Southampton, and then that longer route.
mm,
It worked really well. It's good aircraft.
yeah.
Um, and in
Actually, I don't know whether you ever watch any of the old Bergeracs, which
yes, well, I
yeah,
have done
and
recently.
it actually shows a Twin Otter, an Aurigny Twin Otter landing at Jersey, I think, on one
Oh,
occasion.
really?
Yeah. So there we are. So it's
I didn't
proof of the
see.
fact that they did exist.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember an instant of one of the episodes with Bergerac all those years ago was when they're doing some shot somewhere, and you can hear a Trilander going across, and they say, "Oh, that's the inter-island flights going over."
There
But
you
you could
go.
hear you could always hear the Tridenters,
Yeah, very
Mar
much so.
marvelous aircraft.
They had a distinct noise, to say the least, both outside and inside.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
But there we are. So they dropped the Twin Otters, and we moved back to the Trilanders, which ran through till 2017, I think.
Yeah, indeed. I was trying to think. Yeah, I think it was 2017, might have been 2018 was the last flight, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but yes, we gradually, Aurigny gradually divested themselves of them until we were down to about three, I think, at the point where we were looking, the company was looking forward to which aircraft they were going to replace them with.
yeah,
And of course, they chose the Dornier,
yeah.
um, which took quite a long time for it actually to become part of the fleet because they weren't available, not as new aircraft. So when they got the first Dorniers, they were leased from, I think it was a Portuguese company that was
And
doing it.
they were rough. They were wrecks. Arthur
They
Daily Aviation.
they weren't the best. They weren't the best. I must admit, I wasn't actually, by the time they came on, of course, I was really sort of retiring.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
The two that they had were not good ones, to say the least. But subsequently, yeah, eventually they got the two new Dorniers. But
They
I
needed an
still
extra
don't.
one. They needed three.
You should have three really,
Yeah,
because yeah, you've got to have one flying, one being maintained, and one as a backup.
yeah, yeah.
Um, which yeah, they haven't got now, so it's only the two. So if anything goes wrong, the Aurigny route is stuffed, isn't it, really?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And I
Interesting.
think
Yeah, sorry. Go on.
no, I mean, personally, I always felt that they should have, if they were going to replace the Trilander, should have gone with the Twin Otter because
Yeah,
you know that it works and it is the right aircraft for an airfield the size of Alderney,
yeah, yeah,
really. And I mean, it really is short takeoff and landing. It goes up like a lift, and you see it. It operates around the Scilly, from the Scilly Isles to Land's End and
yeah,
that. I mean,
yeah.
it's the ideal aircraft,
Good
really.
plane. Good plane.
Yeah, and I mean, they've got a track record. I mean, they're used all over the world in rough terrains and awkward spots. And as I say, I think it would have been the better choice, really. And I think also the other thing with the Dornier, which I didn't realize until I flew on it for the first time, um, is the speed of its landing and how I think that's half of the problem with Alderney's runway,
Yeah, it's ripping it
is
up.
it's ripping it up. I don't know. I'm not an expert, but it strikes me that it puts quite a strain on the surface of the runway, which probably isn't brilliant, but
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Because with an otter, it would just chug in, wouldn't it? Almost.
That's it. Yes. I
Mm,
mean, the landing speed was so low.
mm,
Um, and as I say, also the capability of using the grass. But
mm.
there we are. That's the way things went. So it didn't.
Yeah, it is what it is, and there we are. So, must mention as we're coming up towards Alderney week, that must have been a concern for you because you took your career very seriously, and you had loads of planes going out on a Saturday, and invariably there was fog over here.
It really is, yes. It was always amazing that July could be one of the foggiest months, and it always seemed to be foggy when you had that really busy weekend, that busy Saturday
Yeah,
going out.
yeah,
I suppose you remember, I suppose it always seemed to happen because it was so busy, so it caused such a problem, backlog wise and everything. But it did used to, I can't remember very many Saturdays when it just went smooth as anything with no fog. And of course, the hard part for people to understand was they'd turn up at Southampton, it'd be a gorgeous summer day, lovely, hot, sunny, high pressure, low wind,
yeah, yeah.
and you'd say it's foggy, I'm afraid. There was always fog. There was always fog in the channel through the summer, and I don't think that's changed.
No, no. I shall look out for the first Saturday of Alderney week and report back to you.
Well,
Um,
yes, as I say, it used to be a bit of trepidation to it as to, whether it was going to work
how many
or not.
flights did you actually put out on that Saturday? It
But
was more
generally
than
on that
10.
Sat yeah, on that generally on the Saturday, it used to be about 14 that we would
Wow.
do
Yeah.
on the normal ordinary week bank holiday, the start of it. Um, we had monumental delays sometimes, you'd go 3 days and you'd have the whole of the lot just backed up, waiting to go. And, a couple of times we shipped people down to Weymouth to come across on the ferry,
Yeah.
but that only got as far as Guernsey.
Well, it was nearer to Alderney than Southampton, but there we are.
Yeah,
Aurigny, of course, branched into after Sir Derek branched into a sort of regional airline
yeah,
with short Saabs and ATRs, and of
yeah,
course the infamous Embraer, um,
yeah.
which I believe is now back in the UK,
Yes, I think it's did its last
having made its
departure.
last flight for Aurigny. But
Yeah.
it was a real mix, wasn't it, of stuff that they had. I mean, it doesn't make too much sense to have all these planes, does it?
No, I mean, most airlines now, I mean, if you look at it, you would ideally like to have a single type because
Yeah.
it makes everything far more manageable.
Mm.
Uh, but I think we went through a variety of aircraft. When we started to look, or when the company started to look to do regional routes, that was when we had the Saabs.
Yeah.
In fact, before that, sorry, we had the shorts as well because Aurigny took over Guernsey Airlines in the 80s, and then we ended up with a short 360, which was quite a good aircraft actually. It
Do
was,
you know what they used to call it?
yeah, the Vomit Comet.
Yes.
Yes, its performance in inclement weather was yeah, not brilliant,
Yeah,
but it was like
better than a roller
it
coaster.
had a lot of headroom. It was a big square
Oh
box
yeah.
aircraft.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
so it's
yeah.
like being in a jumbo, really. But
Yes, a
but
very short one.
anyway, but we used to have it into Southampton through the summer months on the Saturdays. We used to there was a charter for one of the holiday companies. We used to use it every Saturday down to Southampton to Jersey on a charter. I think it was Butlins was the one of the
Yeah,
holiday
somebody
companies.
like that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But there we are.
But yeah, and then we got the Saabs, which started off the regional routes, but basically wasn't big enough. I
Yeah.
mean, it should have gone straight for ATRs at that point, but then subsequently onto the ATRs, which are good aircraft. I mean,
Mm.
I would say, you know, for the routes that you're trying to operate out of Guernsey, it's fine. Yeah. But the Embraer, I think, was a big mistake. It was a very expensive aircraft to do.
It was a status symbol, wasn't it? It was one up on
I think
Jersey, and well, you just don't
I
fly jets for that length of time distance, do you? Really?
no, I mean you can use it for other things, but I
Mm.
mean when basically its schedule was to Gatwick, which was barely 30 minutes, it's an expensive luxury, really. I think also it came about because at the time, I mean that's 10 years ago now, after Flybe operated them
Yeah.
in Guernsey point. So I think there was that element of we need to have a jet on the route, but it wasn't really the case, and it must have cost a fortune over the years, really.
And
I'm
Flybe
sure.
dropped theirs, didn't they? Pretty quickly.
Yeah,
They didn't
yeah.
find it worked on some of their routes.
No, no. I mean, yes, I mean, at Southampton at one point, Flybe, they had about three of them based there, but they were doing flights to just to France and
Yeah,
places like that. You
yeah.
don't really need it.
Got to be 2 hours plus, I would have thought, to make something like that work.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
also, of course, the other thing with well, with any aircraft based in the Channel Islands, of course, it's a very salty, corrosive
Mm.
atmosphere. Um, all aircraft suffer with it. But a sort of a jet like that, it could have ended up being a bigger problem. They probably made the right decision to let it go when they did.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, let's get on to the pilots because the old clock is ticking. Um, a lot of the early ones, a lot of the early pilots were retired RAF people, weren't they? Is that
Yeah,
a fair
really, yeah,
comment?
because I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, yeah. I mean, if you think about when the company started at the end of the 60s, a lot of the pilots, they were ex-RAF from the war who had then gone on to fly other things and maybe, other airlines that started up between after the war, because there were loads of airlines around sort of in the 50s and 60s.
Hmm.
And yes, a lot of them had flown for them, and then this starts up with a Channel Island based company. And a lot of it was quite an appeal, I think, to a lot of them to be a single crew operator in an environment like that, proper flying,
Hmm. Yeah,
hands on.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
I think a lot of, it was proper flying, I think, and based in the Channel Islands. And, you could be home every night after you've done your work, barring getting stuck somewhere because of the weather. So, yeah, but they were, yeah, basically RAF pilots, ex-RAF at that point. I think probably most of them were.
Let's take a look at Burt Lane. Interesting situation. I heard on one occasion apparently he took off from Alderney. His wife was in immediately behind him, and he
Yeah.
sort of veered off towards Jersey. She tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Bert, this one goes to Southampton."
That's right. Yeah. Well, I'm not sure. I think, uh, yeah, Bert Lane and his wife, they actually were based on the mainland in the
Yeah.
UK, but
Mm,
Bert obviously used to do his trip. He used to do stints in the islands, obviously based in Alderney,
yeah.
and his wife used to go down regularly and sort of be over in Alderney. Yeah, so she was backwards and forwards quite regularly. And yeah, I think that was a day when he'd been flogging between Alderney and Guernsey and Jersey and going backwards and forwards, and then took off and just headed back towards Guernsey or Jersey, and no, wrong way.
Let's talk about dear old Ralph Burridge. He was a character, or is a character.
Yeah, yes, I mean, I don't know when he joined Aurigny. I was trying to think about that the other day. I mean, probably in the 80s, I would
Yeah,
think. I
that's what
don't
I
know.
would have thought. Yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm not quite sure where he was before that, actually.
No, 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 no.
But yes, he's been one of the stalwarts of Aurigny over the years. And
We've got to remember, of course, that at one time we had a situation where we used to carry coffins, didn't you, down to Guernsey from
oh yeah, so do
Alderney.
coffin charters.
Yeah,
Yeah.
coffin charters and all the rest. I think it was. I'm not going to go into it now, but I think it was quite an interesting incident with Ralph where he thought the plane was empty and it wasn't. He thought it was just the coffin and corpse there, but there were others. But there we are. John
Well, I can,
Dowling. No, go
yeah.
ahead with Ralph.
Yeah. No, 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 no. I was talking about coffin charters. I can remember we used to do them from Southampton as well, back to Alderney.
Yeah.
And we were doing one at night time, and the pilot he thought he was going to have to just go back with the coffin, and it was a dark, stormy night, and he thought, I don't really feel very happy about that. I'd rather have somebody on board with me. But luckily, there was a couple of the family members going back as well.
Oh, right. Okay.
But yeah, but he thought, I don't want to get halfway across the channel and somebody tap him on the shoulder.
Yes. Is there anybody there?
Yeah.
John Dowling, a very nice chap.
Yes, he was. Yeah, good chap, Don. He was ex-BEA, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was British European Airways or BOA. No, he was BEA, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah. But yes, he was one of the old sort of school, if you like. I think his wife still lives on the island,
Yes,
actually.
that's correct. She's a
Yeah,
very nice lady. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but he sadly died a few years ago. But yeah, and but I was thinking of some of the other old pilots, like
Yeah.
when when I first started, there was Bob Hamer was the chief pilot,
Hmm.
and then subsequent year there was Doug Coxell,
Yeah.
um, who lived in Guernsey eventually, but he died a few years ago. But they were all pilots who had sort of quite a lot of history, as you say, from the wartime experience and whatnot. And you
Well,
mentioned somebody on your list, Terry.
yes.
And I still can't remember his surname. I've been trying to think about it. I know exactly what it is, but yeah. But
Very nice gentleman. And we got stuck there on one occasion for 3 days.
yeah.
Mrs. Burridge decided on the third day, it was a bit biblical this, that she'd bring in a bottle of wine. So there's a whole group of Aurigny passengers waiting to get off. You were sort of in and out the whole time trying to sort of pacify us and, and this guy Terry kept coming out with the weather forecast, which wasn't good.
Yeah. No, I mean, some of the people who got stuck in the big clamps, it was always interesting, really. There was, Ronnie Cairnduff and
Yeah. Yeah.
Leslie.
Yeah.
They got stuck for one of the 3-day ones, and they had their children with them. This is going back quite a while now, and when they still lived over on the mainland here, and it was the half term for the children, and each day they'd come back and there'd be somebody else's unaccompanied minor going back to Alderney, and they just sort of gradually ended up with like the one back. They took them all on board, and
Temporary
looked after
orphanage.
them. Yeah, yeah, and they looked
Funny.
after them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about John Postlethwaite? He was around for a while, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
Mm.
I don't know, he passed away quite a long time ago
Yes,
now, didn't
yes,
he?
yes, correct. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't know a great deal about his background before he came to, you know, Aurigny as such, but yeah, I don't know whether his wife's still alive on the island, but
I
Bridget.
haven't seen her for a long time. I'm not sure whether she actually lives there anymore. But
Uh,
he's a nice guy. He sort of morphed into being an estate agent after he retired from all
that's
this.
right. Yes, he went into property.
He went into property. Must
Yeah, no,
remind,
Pete Etheridge. Pete
yeah,
Etheridge is
yeah.
another regular one. Yeah,
Because I mean,
sadly.
if you look at Messrs. Burridge, Dowling, Etheridge, and Postlethwaite, three of them were based here, weren't they? I don't
Yes,
think John Dowling was, but the other three were.
yeah. I think initially, well, up until I don't know when it was, we always had three Alderney-based pilots who
Yeah,
actually lived on the island.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and there was always an aircraft night stopped on the island
yeah.
in case of medivacs. And obviously, we always had pilots there to do them. In later years, there were still three Alderney-based pilots, but a lot of them were still living on the mainland.
Right. Okay. So they
Um,
just sort of
there
were in
was,
digs.
yeah, yeah, there was Russ
Hmm.
Watkins, and Terry, who you were
Yeah.
talking about, his name we can't
Terry
remember.
X.
Um, and I think uh what's his name? Warwick
Yeah. Warwick.
Bayman. He was
He was
yeah,
based there.
he was based there, yeah. And I
Oh,
think he was still on the UK at that time and used to
right.
travel back and forwards, but then I think he ended up living on Alderney
Yeah.
permanently.
He did. I actually, Christine gave me a voucher for a flying lesson on one occasion with
Oh,
Warwick, and
okay.
we went along under the cliffs, under the cliffs. Came in for the final approach and he said, "Would you like to have a go?" At this point, I'm sweating profusely, feeling thoroughly ill. And I said, "I don't think so. I think you'd better do it." So there we are. But the other thing about old Warwick, because unfortunately he died a few years ago as well. was that when you got on the aircraft, he'd always say, "My name's Warwick Bayman, blah blah blah." And on one occasion, I got on in Guernsey, and I think I was one sitting behind him and said, "Hello, Warwick, how are you?" And he turned around and he said, "You spot my announcement."
No, it's
But
you,
we've had some good characters. Rob Carpenter, the Australian, another guy that
yeah,
was
yeah,
pretty
yeah. He's been
amusing.
back. I don't
Mm.
know whether Rob's still with Aurigny, is he? I
No,
don't
don't
know.
think so. No,
Yeah.
no, no. He's moved
Yeah, he
on.
joined Aurigny whenever it was he did, and he was with us for quite a while. And then he joined Scott
Yeah.
Airways,
Mm.
flew with them. And then he came back to Aurigny again. But yes, I don't know what he's doing now. But yeah,
But there we are. I mean, he's still young enough to be flying, isn't he? Whereas, a lot of the other people that we've talked about are either retired or no longer
oh
with us.
yeah,
So,
yeah. The other one.
yeah, go ahead.
I was saying another old name was Bill Lamont. He was one
Yeah,
of our pilots from way back, another ex-RAF one. But I was in the early days, I remember him walking out to the aircraft from the office when we were in the old terminal building,
yeah.
right in the early. And he was walking towards me, and his overcoat pocket was smouldering because he hadn't put his pipe out properly. I was going, Bill, your pipe's still.
Your pocket's on fire. How
Yeah, as
funny.
he approaches the aircraft, there's a apron, no
Yeah,
smoking,
yeah,
no
yeah.
naked lights.
I'll tell you someone else that we didn't put on the list who was very, very competent, and that was Sally Barber.
I was going to mention Sally, yeah,
Yeah,
because
she was brilliant.
yeah, lots of people on the island really enjoyed. They were always relaxed when Sally was flying.
Yeah, and I
She
mean
was a
those.
really good pilot.
It was quite a physical plane to fly, wasn't it? The Trilander. You didn't have much
Yeah,
in the way of assistance.
not really, no.
No.
And I mean, yeah, particularly in rough weather, there's a
Yeah.
lot of,
Yeah.
footwork and handwork and everything else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quite. Yeah.
But she
Yeah.
was very good. Lots of people, yeah, felt very reassured when she was
Yes,
flying.
I certainly did. I certainly did. Do you know
I
something?
remember one,
Sorry,
yeah, go on.
I was just going to say we've
No, I
run out
remember
of time, but
one,
keep going. Got a
oh,
few seconds.
no, one day she was stuck at the airport at this end, um, and the weather was doing the usual stuff. And she said, well, she said, it's no good. She said, I've got to go back tonight. She said, that's it. And I said, well, why? She said, well, I haven't brought my makeup with me.
We've run out of time. I've really enjoyed
Oh,
it
no,
as ever.
really?
And you're gonna, yeah, we've up to
Oh,
40 minutes, but it's
oh.
really been good to have a chat. And I know you're coming over shortly, so looking forward to seeing you then.
Well, I've actually picked July now for my second attempt, wasn't
Well, I hope you
it?
don't
So
get fogged in for
it
3 days.
better not be foggy if I'm flying.
Take care, mate. All the very
Okay,
best.
then.
Cheers.
Yeah, see you
Bye.
later.
Bye bye.
Bye.